Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. Just 6 years ago, the Supreme Court changed the fundamental definition of marriage, a definition based on a biblical Christian view of sexuality that has been operative in America since its founding. It's a traditional view of marriage that was fundamentally changed, and it was shared by almost every culture across the world for thousands of years. And the definition was that marriage was between one man and a woman. Now, the decision to redefine marriage against the will of the American people, I mean, you should have people vote on things and not have the Supreme Court basically rule in fiat. This was in 2015. It was cheered on by people who love government making decisions for people instead of people making those decisions for themselves. In just 6 years since that decision, it now appears that we don't agree as a society on what the definition of a girl and boy even is anymore. Now, remember, at the time of the decision by the Supreme Court, we were told that the redefinition of marriage was just about giving two people, regardless of what their sex was, the same right to enter the same kind of marital covenant as heterosexual couples, although everyone always had the same right. Take it up with God if you want to have a ceremony in front of him. Now, raise children, get a dog, put up the American flag, whatever. I don't care. I don't like the appeals to government all the time for validation on actions or decisions that grown adults should be able to make without having the government always constantly 24/7 intervene. But this was how gay marriage was sold to the American people. Now, 6 years later, it seems like the redefinition of marriage was just the start of this effort to redefine every aspect of human sexuality. The latest example of this, I don't even know if I would call it a sexual revolution, just a revolution period of language, is the erasure of the existence of women altogether. And I mean that quite literally. Women are being erased. And I think it's so serious and so dangerous that instead of making jokes or simply just, being outraged, although it's an outrageous issue, is to explain what's happening, who's endorsing it, and the idea that is driving this sweeping change to America. So, to begin, there's a section from the Biden administration's budget proposal that lays out its maternal health guidance. It says this, and I quote, "The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate amongst developed nations, with an unacceptably high mortality rate for Black, American Indian, Alaskan Native, and other women of color. To help end this high rate of maternal mortality and race-based disparities in outcome amongst birthing people," in quote, because that's where I stop. There it is. It's birthing people. This is the Biden administration's maternal guidance policy. The key word being, quote unquote, maternal, a word that's pretty gender specific, as in female specific, lady parts, specific. It's in the guidance of the administration, and they removed that word, mother, and replaced it with the word or words birthing people. Well, it's very Orwellian. The revolution is complete when the language is perfect. And also enough to kind of make your head explode. Does Joe Biden, does Biden and the Democrat Party really believe that birthing people is a more accurate reflection of reality than the word mother? And they do. And if you don't believe me, well, you should, because there's tons of video of them saying this. We have to get off this thing where we say, well, good old Joe and the Democrat Party, they're not radicalized, it's just the left wing. The Biden administration and the entire party at this point are 100% radicalized. And this is just ultimately adopting the insanity of the far left at lightning speed. They're continuing down that path. It is very also increasingly how leftist Democrats talk about women. Remember those videos? Let me show you them. Watch.
Let us recommit our efforts and support to ensure that every birthing person across this nation is empowered and feels safe.
We have not created an infrastructure to support birthing people.
All pregnant and birthing people deserve to be treated with love.
Birthing while Black should not be a death sentence.
Health equity for Black birthing people is attainable.
Mothers and babies and Black birthing people are important.
We desperately need long-term fixes to support the healthcare needs of Black women and birthing people.
The most marginalized Black and Indigenous birthing people.
To systemically shift the way we approach health care for birthing people of color.
And respectful of Black women and birthing people.
The maternal mortality crisis among Black birthing people in the United States.
Black birthing people.
And birthing people.
For birthing people.
Black birthing people.
And a Black birthing person.
Birthing people. Do Joe Biden and Democrats like Cori Bush and AOC, do they really believe that there's no such thing as women anymore? Do Democrats really believe this? I mean, what in the ever-loving world are they smoking? What's the size of your crack rock? I'm very interested in what gets you to this point where you're saying the words birthing people. Now, the Biden administration, well, this philosophy that they're delving into, it's postmodernism, which is the idea that there's no truth, or at least if there is a truth, it can't really be known. And that's how you get your truth and my truth, but no facts. There's no such thing as objective truth. It's an Alice in Wonderland view of the world in which down is up is down. And Joe Biden, well, I guess all the women are Alice and he's the Cheshire Cat. I mean, I don't know. Is Alice even a woman anymore? The whole point is that the Biden administration has been seized by postmodern leftists who believe that reality will conform to whatever they want it to be. It's a make-believe world where you can play pretend and ignore objective truth. Like there's no crisis on the border, or how printing and spending $6 trillion doesn't matter. Kids who are not in danger from coronavirus should be injected with vaccines that only have emergency authorization and wouldn't be legal otherwise. And yes, men can be women and women can be men. I mean, after all, there's no truth, because for a postmodern leftist, whoever has the power, they get to determine what the truth is. And the Biden administration has decided that there's no such thing as women, apparently. And that's why these exact same postmodern leftists who've also taken over corporate America, I swear to you, hands to sky, they call breastfeeding chest feeding now. And a company like Tampax, the tampon people, they tweet stuff like this. This is an actual tweet. It reads, fact, not all women have periods. Also fact, not all women with periods are, not all people with periods are women. Let's celebrate the diversity of all people who bleed. Lots of hashtags. Well, if you're a dude and you're bleeding, you might want to go see somebody about that. Tampax calls that statement a hashtag period truth. I mean, hold up. I mean, if you don't believe that it's true that a man can menstruate, what's wrong with you? Makes you a transphobic bigot. And so, the march to erase women continues. You see, Democrats are embracing the idea that all you have to do to be a woman is to think you are one. See, women are reduced to breasts and menstruation. Yay, equality. At one time, as recently as a couple of days ago, this belief, by the way, would have entitled you to receive some serious therapy. Now today, the idea that women don't exist, this entitles you to bully other women and erase them entirely as a category. Take women's sports, for instance, because a man can now simply say he is a woman. Men who say this are now able to compete against women, which means women no longer truly have a thing called women's sports. And it also means that increasingly, women no longer will win many competitions, because that is increasingly the outcome happening across the country. If men who say they are women and they go through puberty as men and they grow up as men and they start competing in women's sports in the Olympics, eventually women will likely never win an event again. Why? That stubborn, awful thing called reality. The reality, again, is men have bigger bone mass. They have muscle mass. They are anatomically and physiologically different, and taking female hormones or suppressing your own doesn't change that enough to overcome your advantages. You want to have a conversation about privilege, there's the male privilege. So the revolution then continues, and women continue to be erased, unless you think that it's just conservative firebrand Dana Lash digging in with her stuffy traditional views of women and opposing this wonderful new idea about the female gender. Let me point to you some other women who are just as concerned about the Democrat Party's canceling of women. Oh, here's one. How about leftist and straight-up socialist J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series? Not exactly a conservative. And when J.K. Rowling insisted that a man can't really be a woman and asked, really seriously, somewhat facetiously about, well, what happened to the word women, she was attacked for her horrible, outrageous views. And what she said was considered hate speech. And according to the left, J.K. Rowling is transphobic. The left would very much like to cancel her books, but as of yet, they have not been successful. Or how about another woman who agrees with me? She's obviously a bigot according to the far left, Martina Navratilova. I can't ever say her last name. Navratilova, the famous tennis player. You know, that Martina. The first tennis player ever to admit she was a lesbian. An absolute BA of a tennis player. But for saying that men who say that they are women should not be able to compete against women in women's sports, oh, they came from Martina too, the rage mob did. Real women who have real courage from all over the political spectrum, they see where this is going. And just a couple more examples of this sexual insanity. Men who like to dress up as women and they want to read storybooks to your children, as you've probably heard by now, they have what they call Drag Queen Story Hour. Now, if you object because you think that maybe perhaps men who behave like hypersexualized women have and maybe they shouldn't be reading books to kids, right? Maybe keep that in the adult entertainment section, maybe keep it in the club, whatever. If you express this disagreement, they'll try to cancel you. And just lately, you notice that all those newfangled pronouns showing up next to people's name at work, it's an attempt to force everybody to participate in the cancellation of women by embracing the notion that you are whatever gender you say you are. And there's no such thing as binary sexuality or fixed gender. And if you don't put those pronouns next to your name and affirm that you agree with us, they'll erase you just like they're erasing women. And if you disagree with all of that, they call you a TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and it's a sexist slur said by sexists. This is the end game of the sexual revolution, complete and total obedience to the postmodern left, who have now seized the Democrat Party and they want to use the full power of the state to make you complicit in this whatever Alice in Wonderland world in which we live. Agree to the crazy or you're erased. That's all there is to it. So we should make an appeal, honestly, to people who are classical liberals, people who are open-minded, who are still inquisitive and curious, and especially Democrat women of good faith, and women who just like their daughters and want them to succeed. All true actual feminists, because really it doesn't matter what party line you are. This is ultimately the erasure of women is a progressive patriarchal attempt. It's a progressive patriarchal strategy. The patriarchy is real and it votes Democrat. It's progressive and it believes that women should be erased. No, true feminism is recognizing that women exist and women have all kinds of choices and we're not homogenized and some of us may make different choices from others. So those women, that's really ultimately who we should be appealing to. The sense of those women, because we have to stop pretending that ideas like this don't have consequences. It's not a small thing to call mothers birthing persons in order to accommodate people who are dealing with gender dysphoria. We don't hate people whose gender identity is confused. I mean, I can't stand the idea that simply questioning something means persecution. It's illiberal. But we also can't rearrange society around a tiny percent of people's mental pathologies. This is not simply a matter of live and let live. This is the bending of biological reality and the imposition of a lie on a whole society. And it severely damages women. It damages your daughters. Imagine your daughter being defeated by a biological male after working her entire life to be a top track athlete. Because that's what's happening now. Imagine a woman who has been raped going to a women's shelter and finding out that biological men who say that they are women are also at that shelter. And now they feel unsafe. Imagine an entire psychological and medical field who can only offer affirmative care to any kind of young girl with gender dysphoria. And that means they have to affirm her feelings. And if that girl simply feels like she's actually a boy, then they must be affirmed by a medical professional. And if that girl, who could be your daughter, say if they want to have surgery, if they want to remove their breasts, by law in many places, that has to be affirmed by procedure with the approval of medical professionals, and it's happening now. This is the so-called sexual revolution that is being entirely embraced by the Marxist Democrat Party in this administration. And at this point, we can't keep pretending that Democrats are the party of women or feminism. This is a party that doesn't care about women. If you're erasing them, you don't care. And if you don't believe that they should exist, then you don't care. They care about the socialist and Marxist ideology and the imposition of said ideology on you and all other women. Elections have consequences, and because of hatred on the left for Donald Trump, many have embraced an administration that is at war against their own daughters, their own selves. Enough is enough. You got to protect women and daughters. You have to protect our children and affirm the biological reality that women do in fact exist. We have the stretch marks and the episiotomies and all of the consequences of 9 months of labor to prove it, right? And you have men and you have women, and there are no such thing as birthing people. There are mothers. And if we continue to vote for a party that embraces this gender insanity, then you're consenting to the erasure of women and our own daughters. That is sexist. That is misogynistic. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the patriarchy. Now up next, the ACLU is accusing parents who are against critical race theory of wanting to end all discussion on race in the classroom. Is that entirely true? We'll talk with Christopher Rufo when we return next. Are you ready for the next natural disaster? Because if we've learned one thing recently, it's that the unthinkable can happen at any moment. And the best way to ensure that you make it through fine and fed is to prepare now with an emergency stockpile of food from My Patriot Supply. They're America's preparedness leader. They give millions of people peace of mind for an uncertain future. But don't wait until it's too late. Be proactive and act now before you have a stock market crash or more civil unrest or worse. My Patriot Supply has served millions of families for over a decade, earning 39,000 4- and 5-star reviews. And their food is specially packaged to stay fresh and delicious for 25 years. And unlike other emergency foods, each meal provides 2,000 much-needed calories when you need them the most. So if you act today, you receive 25% on their 4-week emergency food kit. Just visit preparewiththefirst.com right now or today to save 25% on a valuable 4-week kit. That's preparewiththefirst.com. Christopher Rufo is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at City Journal. He's been on the leading front of battling CRT, critical race theory, and the latest attack is from the ACLU, who says that state lawmakers are trying to ban discussions of race, that's the characterization, altogether from the classroom, and they say that's an infringement on student rights. I'm not quite sure that that's the best way to frame that. Christopher Rufo joins us now. Christopher, it's good to be with you. I appreciate your work also on CRT. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be with you. And this is an absolutely ridiculous, atrocious, flat-out lie from the ACLU. It doesn't ban the teaching of history about racism. It bans teachers practicing racism in the classroom. It's a very different thing. You can teach about slavery, segregation, historical injustices in any state in the union. I think that's important. That's a kind of universal opinion. But what you can't do is you can't practice race essentialism, judging students on the basis of race, or we're saying that all members of racial group A are bad in these ways, X, Y, and Z. You can't assign collective guilt. So you can't say if you're a member of a certain racial group, you're responsible for historical crimes. And you can't also practice segregation. So you can't actually split students on the basis of race into different classrooms, different training sessions. This is very simple. It prevents state-sanctioned racism. The ACLU should frankly be ashamed of itself for peddling these lies.
Yeah, I think that's the mystifying thing. No one ever said that you couldn't talk about race, but it's just as you said, it's actually teaching division. Now, because I want to talk about that more, but you also, I'm looking at your website, you also wrote a really great primer on critical race theory, because I think that that's the big struggle that a lot of parents have. I mean, they're not really in some of these philosophical or, all these offshoot of Marxist theory areas. They just know that what they're seeing in their child's material and what they're hearing from educators in the classroom is off. It's wrong. And some of the parents, like in my town, we had a huge fight over this, where we had a school board battle and we won by over 70% of the vote. And it was a lot of minority families that were speaking out against this, because they were saying that it teaches division and it teaches segregation. And I wanted to pull up at ChristopherRufo.com, you go into winning the language war, and you also get into, this is how it's defined. This is how critical race theory is defined. If you're talking to parents, Christopher, and you're trying to give them pointers, because if you're explaining you're losing is the golden rule in politics, how would you tell them to address this, define it, and just put it out there for people in like 30 seconds, like an elevator pitch?
Yeah, I would say that critical race theory is a form of race-based Marxism. It seeks to divide the world into oppressor and oppressed based on skin color, and is a political ideology that has no place in the classroom. You can say that and repeat that exact phrase. I think it's accurate, it's punchy, it's effective. And I put together this briefing book to provide parents who are really busy taking care of their kids, going to their jobs, a place where in 30 minutes of reading, they can digest what critical race theory is, what are the key texts and beliefs, what are the key concepts, and how to speak about it in a way that's effective, that reaches a broad range of people. And this is exactly what's needed, because people are up in arms. I'm just trying to provide them with the language and the knowledge that they need in order to be successful in fighting back.
And that language, as you say, is super important. Parents have to win the language war on this. Talk a little bit about that. Like, I like how you said that this is Marxist racism, because that's exactly what it is. And language is super important in this.
Yeah, I think it's important, too, to think of this in terms of critical race theory in the classroom as a form of state-sanctioned racism. It's taxpayer dollars being used to fund an ideology that explicitly separates people into racial categories and loads them with connotations, saying that these people are bad because of their whiteness, these people are inherently good because of their other attributes. And this has no place in the classroom. It's a form of racism funded by the state, and I think that we should limit it. If you want to promote critical race theory on your own time and with your own money, that's fine. You're protected by the First Amendment, so you can actually say whatever you want, but you're not entitled to use taxpayer money to fund your ideology. That's up to the voters. That's up to the Constitution. And I think we have a very strong argument that all funding should be stripped away from critical race theory in the classroom. And if there are instances in states where they're practicing it, we're going to be taking it to court and showing that it's not only intellectually bankrupt, but it's actually a violation of existing law.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking to Christopher Rufo, who's been there, kind of the tip of the spear on this with CRT. When Andrew Breitbart was alive, and this was, I think, well, this was obviously before 2012, I remember there was a story, and we were writing different things about it. Derek Bell and then President Barack Obama, and Derek Bell's pioneering of critical race theory, which seemed really at the time kind of archaic. And why is this so important now? And it has been like lightning speed. We went from talking about a situation with Derek Bell, and then everything was very quiet. And then, Christopher, we just noticed around the country, as you did too, which is why you started really pushing this and leading this effort, all these different schools, and it didn't matter if it was an affluent area or not. There was no rhyme or reason, just every school around the country, this kind of curriculum that was CRT inspired, even if they wouldn't say it in name, began popping up everywhere. So how did we get from this being this really kind of archaic thing that seemed to be left in the 60s to now it's in every school, and it's even being taught in elementary school?
Well, I think the reason practically is because they've been designing this strategy for 40 years, where they take these ideas from critical theory, from neo-Marxism, from critical race theory, and then they train university students, and very importantly, they train teachers' colleges, so state colleges of education, where they're putting this ideology into the minds of our future teachers. And guess what? When you fast forward 10, 15, 20 years, this is what they've absorbed in their teachers' education. They're now applying it to the classroom. So what I've seen in my reporting is a huge division where you have older teachers that are following a traditional pedagogy. They're teaching an honest and accurate view of history. But those teachers that are under the age of 35 are bringing in these ideas that they learned in these graduate schools of education that are deeply influenced by critical race theory, critical pedagogy, critical gender theory. And that's what we're having being pushed in our classrooms, and they're being funded again by taxpayers. So listen up, everyone. You have an option to have this in your state, in your school district or not, but you have to get activated. You have to figure out what's happening, and you have to fight at every step of the way to make sure that you are not funding a state-sanctioned racism, and you are not funding a critical race theory in your local education system.
I love how in your briefing book you give some of the best practices, actually some of the strongest attacks against critical race theory. And some of these stories, there are things in here I haven't even heard of that you have. I mean, you have a huge list of actual real life examples of critical race theory under using stories to build the argument in practice. And I mean, I'm amazed at some of this. When parents tell these stories and when they put this into, meat space, into reality, that seems to be, as you said, the most effective way to countermeasure and counter-argue this CRT. And I'm sure that there's even more than you have listed here.
Yeah, that's right. Those are just the stories that I've broken, but you're precisely right. If I tell you critical race theory is an intellectually bankrupt ideology, we can debate about that in the abstract. But if I tell you in Cupertino, California, they're taking third graders and they're separating them into oppressor and oppressed and forcing them to atone for their power and privilege, all of a sudden that hits home. It's emotional. It drives people. Because the problem is not that critical race theory intellectually is a flawed theory. It is. The problem is that critical race theory applied in the classroom is hurting children. Mm-hmm. And when you start hurting people's children, that's when people wake up, that's when people take action, and that's when people are going to say, enough is enough.
And that's the big thing. You're exactly right. It's hurting children. What are some of the results that you've been seeing? Because obviously, I mean, I know that it's still probably some of the kids that have been maybe early recipients of this kind of ridiculous, not really education are maybe still in school, maybe in junior high, high school. But are there any studies, or are there any kind of stories that talk about like maybe how do these kids feel? How are they turning out after being indoctrinated like this? It's abusive.
Yeah, I actually just released a months-long investigation of critical race theory in Portland, Oregon area schools. And what I found is that Portland, Oregon was one of the first adopters of this ideology. They've been doing these training programs for almost, for actually more than a decade. And what we see is that when they're training students to become race revolutionaries, when they're telling white students that they need to fundamentally reshape their white identity and become essentially apostles of white privilege and white fragility and white reconstruction, what you see, it ends up in almost every case in anger, in rage, in this kind of destructive impulse. And then what you see, I think, is very clear, a connection from this ideology in schools and other institutions to the violence in the streets. In Portland, Oregon, over the last year, you've had dozens of minors, dozens of children and teenagers get arrested for vandalism, arson, rioting, destruction, gun charges, and it's fueled by this ideology and then put into practice in the streets. The recipe is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for unrest, for violence, for destruction. It's a philosophy that seeks to negate a reality, to cancel reality, and then to fight to create this utopia that they believe can happen. So it's deeply destructive, and parents all over the country should look at Portland, Oregon as a cautionary tale.
Yeah, and I've seen so many parents speaking out about this. It's so weird because of all of the criticism of CRT, and I realize that people try to make it seem like it's just white people that are complaining about it. The people that I've seen actually really talking about it the most are minority parents. One last question for you with this. You get into, and this is a phrase I honestly had not heard until actually just a couple of months ago, race abolitionism, and not like abolition the way that we would think of it historically, like Elijah Lovejoy and the Quakers, and not that kind of abolitionism, but race abolitionism. And talk to me, because tell me how CRT defines that, because this is scary stuff.
Yeah, there's an academic named Noel Ignatieff who popularized this idea of abolishing the white race. And what that means is kind of a dual meaning. They say that it's abolishing whiteness as a social construction, as a set of cultural practices, as an arrangement of power. But this is really ugly language. If you said abolish the race of any other race or ethnicity, it would immediately set up the alarms. And this is becoming really common practice. I reported on a story from New York City in which a public high school teacher sent an email to white parents saying that they need to become, quote, white traitors, and then, quote, advocate for white abolition. This is kind of a euphemism that verges on almost genocidal language. It's really toxic and ugly stuff. There's no way these ideas, if they hit the mainstream, are going to end with a transcendence of racial differences, a coming together across racial differences. This is really pitting American against American in the ugliest and most divisive way possible.
It sounds like ethnic cleansing is what it sounds like. It definitely sounds like the opposite of e pluribus unum. For sure. Very anti-American indeed. Christopher Rufo, ChristopherRufo.com. Go and read his briefing on this. And you have that just for free for everybody. That's awesome. Thank you so much for your work that you've done on this and all you've done to make sure that parents know what they're up against in schools. I know that it's helped our town immensely and so many others. I know there's 2 other towns next to ours that are now in that exact same fight now. So that was a lot of work to be done. Thank you so much for what you've been doing on it.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, folks, up next, not just with the Fauci emails, the Vanity Fair piece, but what does the future hold for a guy who a lot of people think really intentionally misled a nation? And members of Congress, they're starting to take aim at cryptocurrency. So what's that all about? We're going to talk with Representative Warren Davidson of Ohio next. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's vision of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee. And by that, they don't just mean the great taste, but where you drink it and the adventures it fuels and inspires. Most of all, they just want you to drink your coffee and enjoy it. So whether you're brewing the perfect cup of joe to start your day, or whether or not you're just, you're opening up a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours. Use code Dana at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. Representative Warren Davidson, a Republican from Ohio, joins us to talk about now the emails that have been released, published, reported on by everyone, and then, of course, that explosive Vanity Fair piece. And Congress is growing increasingly concerned about cryptocurrencies. Yeah, I know. What is it? Someone asked the IRS if they were going to get involved in this, so he joins us to discuss both of these issues. Congressman Warren, thank you for joining us. It's good to have you.
Yeah, nice to talk with you, Dan.
So, and it says Congressman Warren, it's Congressman Davidson, by the way. So, Congressman, first, let me start with this. I want to start with the cryptocurrency thing, because you actually were tweeting about this. I saw this from your Twitter feed a little bit earlier, and we've been, on radio, I've been talking about the ransomware attack and cybersecurity and how it's often treated kind of, as like just an aside, like as an accessory overall in national security. And everything that I heard was, well, the dark side, this Russian hacker group, they got paid in cryptocurrency. It's untraceable. They're never going to find it. Well, then, just to catch everybody up to speed, then our government DOJ comes out today, makes a statement. Yeah, we were able to actually recover most of this back, most of the ransom back that Colonial Pipeline had paid. Dark side. And you had tweeted about this, and then I was looking in all the comments. There was a fascinating conversation where some people were arguing that fiat actually makes it easier to hide crimes of this nature, whereas cryptocurrency, it's a little bit more traceable, which I thought always that it was kind of maybe one of the attractions that people had for cryptocurrency because it was untraceable. So set us straight on this and talk a little bit about this if you would.
Yeah, so there are a couple different ways to own cryptocurrency, and one of the ways that you do it is through an exchange. So one of the most famous exchange in the United States is Coinbase, for example. So when you do that, it's really a very similar relationship to a bank. But no matter how you own cryptocurrency, it's not truly secret, it's pseudonymous. So you can follow on a blockchain, a truly distributed ledger. It's immutable, it can't be altered. And you can follow all the moves. So if you look at a public part, there's a public part and a private part. The private keys are what unlock the value, but the public piece on a distributed ledger moves, and you can follow all those moves. Normally, like the best practices for the companies that monitor this is they'll follow 5 moves after a transaction's completed or more, and just say, this is illicit. And some of the people that are doing know your customer activities, they won't process transactions if they can't show that the person using the exchange is who they say they are.
Interesting. So that kind of goes into my next question for you: were these criminals just really stupid and that they use like a public ledger to do this, or is that just? I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to outsmart that with crypto.
Well, I won't say there's no way. I mean, there are smarter criminals than these criminals. But on the other side, it wasn't like the Bitcoin blockchain was somehow hacked by the FBI. It was the off-ramps. So when people come into and out of, in this case, say Bitcoin, you change U.S. dollars or euros or some form of hard currency for the token. And when you do, all of the on-chain activity, all of the blockchain activity is on ledger. So you can see every move, and you can see where do they go out into something else. They move out of Bitcoin into euros or dollars. Then you go say, okay, you changed this transaction right here into US dollars. Who did you do that with? And that's how you solve that kind of case.
Very interesting. So why is it that I'm reading, we're talking with Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio, why is it that I'm reading now about the federal government wanting to get involved in, or at least looking at, early, possibly getting involved in cryptocurrency? Why is that, and what do you think is going to come of that? Is that actually something that we're going to see now with the federal government getting involved in regulating it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I've been in Congress since 2016. I've been calling on Congress to provide regulatory clarity for this space since I've been in Congress. And at that time, Bitcoin was trading for, well under $1,000. Now it's over $30,000. So, 30x return. It's peaked over 64, 63. And so the space is trillions of dollars now. So,
right.
Bitcoin is the most widely known, but there are a lot of other use cases for this technology. And a lot of it depends on the Securities and Exchange Commission being able to say what is a security and what is not a security. And in the absence of that regulation in the United States, people are moving offshore with the ideas. So if we want the innovation to continue to flourish in America, which has happened,
that makes sense.
For automotive, aviation, aerospace, medical, pharmaceutical, agriculture, all this, the internet age, all this happens in America. If we want to keep leading, we have to get some sort of regulation that makes it clear if you launch your project in the United States, some government regulator is not going to come and nuke it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. It's a very good point that I hadn't thought of before. So I'm glad that we had you on to ask you about that. Switching gears here, we got to talk about the situation with Anthony Fauci and these emails that have come out. Let me ask you this. I know the answer to this, but I want you to tell everyone your answer to this. Do you think that the good doctor, and I use air quotes with that, should resign?
Well, I think he should resign, but frankly, I don't think he should be. It should be a race to see whether he resigns or someone shows up with the cardboard box to walk him out of the building. He should be fired. I mean, that's the point of the Fired Act, is Fauci's incompetence requires early dismissal. It's time for him to go. I mean, he's been there since 1984.
And I want to interject because you introed that act. The Fauci incompetency requires early dismissal, aka the Fired Act. That's something that you had introduced into this. Because I think that's what it would take. I mean, he would have to be ousted. Congress would have to make that kind of move, because I just get the impression from his demeanor that he's not going to be a guy that goes willingly for the good of the country.
No, he's not acted for the good of the country since he's been in the role. I mean, he wants to blame everyone in the world for being unprepared when it's his job to be prepared. And not just for himself to be prepared, but for the United States of America to be prepared. He was underprepared. He wasn't prepared even in his own remarks. You go from masks aren't effective to where you need to wear 2 masks as recently as this year. He goes to, we never funded gain of function research anywhere, to, well, only a modest amount, and where? In Wuhan. So, he shouldn't be trusted. And he's the same kind of person Dwight Eisenhower cautioned against in his farewell address. I mean, we always think of the military-industrial complex, but Eisenhower also cautioned against the scientific technical elite. And Fauci is emblematic of that, reason for that caution.
That's a great point, and especially using his credentials and trying to play to his, its appeal to authority to caution people away from making that connection with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which then brings us to why I understand funding of certain scientific issues and obtaining certain scientific advances. But this is dangerous stuff. And to enter into a partnership, and I've been talking about Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance, to enter into a partnership with an entity that we look at as a geopolitical foe, an entity that's already stolen tons of IP, that's hacked us before, why in the ever-loving world, Congressman, would we ever be involved with giving our tax dollars to these people and have them do this gain-of-function research? It's so dangerous. Your thoughts on this?
That's a really polite way to phrase it, Dana. I mean, why exactly? I mean, and look, if we were going to do that, when you're testifying before the United States Senate and Senator Rand Paul asks, are we funding this? Why not give an honest answer in a case for defending it? And why? Because you weren't just doing it, you were doing it with the Chinese government. And so it's a horrible approach. It was very dishonest by Dr. Fauci in front of the United States Senate. And, for all of his deception, I think he needs to be terminated. I mean, since 1984. I mean, a fitting reference, everyone gets the 1984 analogies, but it's really been Orwellian how our government has reacted during this pandemic. And Fauci's led the way, provided cover for the World Health Organization when Donald Trump tried to hold them accountable for telling the truth. Where did this virus originate and how did it originate?
I would imagine that you all were left as much in the dark, it seems, as the president and even Mike Pompeo. When I was looking at this Vanity Fair piece and how there was an individual in the State Department that actually was on his beat specifically was China and had mirrored the Institute's website and was collecting all of this data and then turned that into a dossier in which he shared with Mike Pompeo. And it was from that Pompeo publicly demanded an investigation into these labs. Then on April 30th, that morning, you had the intel agencies release this like super ambiguous, like almost like on purpose to raise more questions statement. And then later on that afternoon, Trump goes out at the press conference, goes before the White House press pool, says, yeah, I've seen the private intel. Yeah, they were totally up to something. And that seemed like, I mean, here you have these bureaucratic agencies, almost like a fifth pillar, so to speak, and then members of Congress and the President of the United States who seem entirely at odds with how this should be handled and what the next step should be. A lot of people were wondering, okay, who's really running the country? The people that we elected are these like nameless bureaucrats who were trying to lie to us. Your thoughts on this, and were you kind of in that same boat that day when all of that information came out?
100%. And look, on issue after issue, when Donald Trump said drain the swamp, I don't think he or many people realized how deep that swamp is. I mean, nothing more than when you see Alex Vindman testify where you say, well, he has input on foreign policy. No, the president of the United States, the commander in chief, sets foreign policy. People like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman don't do that. And there are people in these bureaucracies who feel like it's their job. They're the custodians for the country. And that's why President Eisenhower wisely cautioned against not just the military-industrial complex, but the scientific technical elite. They put their own interests in front of the United States of America's interests, in front of the people's interest. And it's our job in Congress to represent those interests. And it's been painful to sit in these same briefings and hear the same information and then come out and watch colleagues go exact opposite. And we're sitting there going, were you in the same briefing I was in? I mean, that's not what I took from this briefing. And then, unfortunately, to not have the votes. So to be in the minority and not be able to change it, it's been very painful. I look forward to us getting back on offense. I hope it doesn't take that long for Dr. Fauci to be fired. He should not be on America's payroll.
No, I completely agree with you. Last question for you, talking with Congressman Warren Davidson. We so appreciate your time today on this and the crypto issue. So now that it looks like we are unofficially concluding that this, at the very least, and I think it's generous, my own personal opinion is that it's generous to say it's a lab leak. So what happens next? Because I can't imagine with this administration that they're going to take any steps at all whatsoever, to punitive steps towards China at this point, and nor do I think that this administration would be able to even handle it if they tried. So where do we go from here? I mean, would there be any penalty to even pay? I mean, how would that even happen?
Well, Donald Trump has highlighted that he should, expect China to be held accountable and pay for the consequences of their actions. I don't think Joe Biden's going to do the same thing. But I will say I'm encouraged when I hear Secretary of State Blinken talking about China being, refusing to engage in the rules-based system around the world. And that's kind of code that's stern language from the State Department to say, look, China's not doing what they promised to do. They promised when they became part of the World Trade Organization, they would be a market economy. No one sees them as a market economy because they're not. I mean, they steal intellectual property, they block and shape access to their market. They dump and subsidize into our market, and they do that not just to America, but to everyone in the world. They're abusive in their practices. And my hope is that when I hear our Secretary of State saying he's going to hold them accountable for doing what they said they would do, that they do that. But frankly, to hold him in line, they've got John Kerry over there as the political officer, kind of checking Blinken to make sure he doesn't go off the reservation and do something too common sense. So everywhere you look, the Biden administration, if they've got somebody reasonably competent in a job, they've got a political overseer, holding them in check. And that's what they want to do around the country, including in education.
Yes, that's a very good point as well. To have a minder, so to speak. Boy, there's going to be a lot to watch here, especially as we have now apparently meetings with Russia coming up towards the end of this month. Congressman Davidson, always a pleasure. So good to talk with you. We'd love to talk with you again in the future. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Dana. Thank you.
Take care. All right, folks. Well, from the erasing of women to Hollywood's odd portrayal of women, why can't there ever be a time when a woman is just a plain old villain in movies? We used to be able to have that, but now it doesn't seem like it anymore. We'll talk about Disney's latest film. Keep it here. Well, it's a strange and confusing time to be a woman. So on one hand, you have the Democrat Party calling mothers birthing people and erasing women as a category. And on the other hand, society says that there are still women, but only when it's advantageous to say so for the left, like when you want to tout the fact that Kamala Harris is the first female vice president, or birthing person, sorry. Then there are women again. Yet when women are acknowledged for being the biologically real distinct gender that we are, we're never quite sure apparently what a woman can or should be. Case in point, meet Cruella, the latest Disney villain in the retelling of the character from 101 Dalmatians. She's a goth queen. The original Cruella was just an evil villainess, a character who was an animal abuser. She kidnapped and killed puppies and made coats out of their skins. It's kind of creepy and awful. The reason Cruella skins puppies is because their fur is particularly soft, whereas adult Dalmatians have very coarse hair, like her soul. It's interesting that Disney didn't feel the need to justify Cruella's evil in the 1961 animated film, because Cruella was just mean and liked to kill puppies for their fur. She was a... But not today. See, today's evil Cruella is a misunderstood woman who has been wronged in the past. She's a tough girl boss who has every right to be mean and tough, because women should be able to be mean and tough and not be seen as nasty. I mean, after all, don't men get that privilege? On the other hand, if Cruella is mean and tough, it's only because people have done her wrong. Her badness is merely a response that can be and will be justified by the story. So here's an idea. Why not just let female characters be bad, be evil? It seems when we're not trying to erase women these days, we pretend that women are saints that can do no wrong. And I assure you, as a woman, we ain't. We act like any criticism of our or negative portrayal of women is verboten, even in movies. And we talk about toxic masculinity. You all know that there's a thing called toxic femininity, right? Because there is. And because there are just some plain old nasty women in the world. Where do you think the word Karen came from? Besides some wonderful woman's name, we're so sorry. No, just like men, each woman's unique, and there are some truly mean women out there. So why then can't we just see that on the silver screen and not have it justified or explained away? Where is our evil emperor, like in Star Wars with Emperor Palpatine? He has or Darth Vader, you know, the Sith Lord. He has no redemptive qualities, and it makes for a more chilling film, right? Or, I don't know, the villain from No Country for Old Men, Anton. Oh my gosh, his makeup makes him look terrifying too, by the way. Javier Bardem plays him and he's brilliant. Totally remorseless, zero compassion. He will kill you as soon as he looks at you. And the whole flipping a coin and all of that stuff, terrifying. We don't care. He gets to be a psychopath. There's no justification for it. And it makes the movie riveting because that's a mystery. You don't know why this person ended up being that way. Now, I know this is a Disney movie, and Cruella isn't Michael Myers from Halloween, but the point is we're either saying that women don't exist or we're putting them in the box. How about we do neither, right? Sometimes women are just bad, and that's part of it too. It's part of life. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night, and don't bend that knee.